Hey there guys, it's Joey and this is a requested video. I was asked if I would talk about my experiences when I was a new witch in the beginning, how I knew I was a witch and things of that nature. And if anybody else wants to VR this, I think it would be a really great idea because it will help people who are asking for that sort of insight to have lots of different perspectives on knowing you were a witch and this, that and the other. So when people ask, I think I usually say, and this is how I feel about it, that I was born this way. Lady Gaga, go! And I've always felt very connected to certain things which I believe are synonymous with being a witch, at least in the very early tentative steps. They could be considered as indicators, maybe. I was always very, very nature-based. I love trees and nature and going for walks, and I have very fond memories of going for walks with both grandparents, and my grandmother used to take us all around the fields and with the corn, and she knew everything about herbs and flowers and plants, which unfortunately we were never really taught. But she was very earthy and her garden was incredible, and she had herbs hanging up in the kitchen, that she would tell us when we were older what they were for, and we never got the chance to find out. And on the other side, my nana on the other side took us for walks and things, and very naturey based, and she was very interested in ghosts and spirits and things of that nature, and I believe it's that side which the spirits stuff comes from, although my mother is clairaudient, which my sister is, which is hearing spirits, so maybe it's both. So there is a family tie there, although I don't think that is necessary, and I don't get on with any of them apart from my middle sister right now, who is also a witch. So we had each other growing up, me and my sister, and we were very secretive about it, and we didn't tell anyone. And I usually tell the story where I innately knew how to use a pendulum, and I had it in my head that it had to be a silver charm on a silver necklace, and I would draw a circle on a piece of paper, and it had to have 8 segments, wheel of the year I guess, with answers written in each segment, and I would use the pendulum. And no one ever taught me that. It's just something I innately did, and I remember doing it as early as 6 or 7, and one day my middle sister came in and she was like, oh my god, I do that. And then we had someone to talk to, so we were very lucky growing up that we had each other and we could talk about it. There wasn't any real push of religion in our family. My mother always claimed to be Christian, but that's about as far as it ever went. We were baptised, and that's about as much as that influenced my immediate family life. My nana's sister's family were very Christian, but we never saw them, so I never had what a lot of people had, this whole dogmatic religion forced on them, in any religion forced on them, and then sort of breaking free of that. I never had any of that, and I was very strong-willed growing up, and still anyway, so I don't know if it really would have worked. I always questioned everything growing up, including studies. It's why I did so well, and the main religion that we were taught in school was Christianity, and I never gelled with it. I never meshed with it. For me, it felt very against women, and there was one pupil in particular who was very vocal about, and very Christian, and he was very vocal about how homosexuality was unnatural, and I used to have huge, full-blown arguments with him because I just hated the notion. I'm straight, but I don't think that that sort of I don't know, hatred, I guess, should be allowed just because in the name of a religion. I didn't believe in that at all. So, witchcraft had always been around. I know my mother did a spell for all her waffling on about being Christian, but I know she did it as at one point as a protection spell, and I don't really agree with the format at all. The format was taking hair off all of our pillows and tying it around a tree, and then if any curse was coming at the family or members, it would kill the tree. And supposedly the tree did die, and she suspected this one woman, but to be honest, paranoia, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, we were old enough to, at that point, that she could have asked us, 13, 14, 15, not like babes, what else can I tell you? So there was definitely a natural ability, and talking of natural abilities, I suppose, even though I don't get on with my parents whatsoever, they had both been interested in spirit stuff as teenagers. Obviously, my mother later told us she could hear spirits. And my sister said at the time, if you'd have told me that like ages ago, that might have really helped me, because my sister thought she was mad. And like, I thought I was mad as well, because I could see them. And like, we both didn't tell anybody at that point because we thought we were nuts. And so when we actually came together about the pendulum stuff and actually could talk about it, then that helped us out hugely. But my sister would have liked to have known that earlier. My father did tell me that he at one point had a money box that had a slot machine on it, and he could predict what it would come out at 5-10 times in a row, and then it would stop. Anyway, they both parents got involved with using Ouija boards and spirit groups, and had some really scary experiences which they pass on and told us about at being quite young, and that kind of frightens you at being a quite young age, hearing about possession and stuff. So yeah. And I think I really did clamp down on my sort of abilities of that nature at that point. The house we lived in, and of course the parents had a very negative vibration. It attracted some really negative stuff to that house. I am so pleased I never have to go back to that house ever again, and it will soon be sold, thank goodness. But my sister heard hissing all the time in her ear in that house, and there was a feeling of dread in that house as well. Like sometimes, and my sister got this as well, you'd be upstairs and you had this feeling like, get out, 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 and you just went, you ran downstairs. Like, and if we were on our own in the house, quite frequently we slept downstairs where all the animals were. So, yeah. It was a little bit scary in that house at points, and other than the unfortunate other side of living there, of course. Trying to think if there's any more pertinent tales from growing up at that point. Oh, I had a inverted commas imaginary friend when I was younger, spirit, and I freaked my mother out one day because I described him, and it turns out that it was my father's brother who had died when he was 17. And like, yeah, and I had dreams at one point, and I told my mother about it because she was in them, and it was about her in a van and had sliding doors going somewhere and stuff, and that happened, and she was freaked out with me. So yeah, there were things that happened growing up, and they're a little bit on the, I guess, supernatural side of things that, there's no way I could have known about the van and stuff. This, that and the other. The pendulum stuff, being very connected to Earth. I was very connected to the idea of the 4 elements growing up. I really didn't like it when people started calling it a backward way of thinking, like when you went into school and stuff. Whilst I fully embrace science, and still do, I really felt strongly about the 4 elements and the power behind them, the power behind those things. Again, I don't know why, I just always did, and that's something else that ties into being a witch. And we have read around witchcraft, me and my middle sister. My youngest sister was always afraid of it, and then at around age, I don't know, 11 or 12, she got a load of books because she was looking up love spells, and me and my sister were like, oh. Literally, me and my middle sister at that age were like, you can't just dabble into something for a love spell. And you don't want to force someone to love you anyway. And we always felt like that. We always felt like that. So that's interesting. So that's when we were very, very young. So I guess it's always been there. And I actually read around the subject for a lot longer than a lot of people do before embracing the physical practice. I don't know if it was just me. I'm a bit of a bookworm. I like to have a full breadth of knowledge before I start trying things, and some people really don't agree with that approach. Some people are very anti it. But growing up I was solitary, and at that point I'd never met anyone other than my sister, who was younger than me and had as much experience as I did, and there was no one around. So reading from then until 5 years later than then, I can't remember exactly when I started. And then when I went to university, I went to university at the very first time in Cambridge, and Cambridge has, although it has Christian connections, it has a very strong pagan community, and I had teachers there that I will not talk about. And that's when I started practicing, and I was very, very excited at that point to get quite a lot of the items. You know, have a cauldron, and that's when I got my wand and things of that nature. And this is something else people are really arsy about. But at that point in my life, I had the money where I could get the bits and pieces, and I was thrilled to do so and try things out. And having a cauldron and using cauldrons and things is still one of my favourite things to do. And I would get herbs and learn about herbs and things of that nature. And so started my journey with Athermays, because I actually bought a black handled bog standard Athermay and didn't like it. I bought my first tarot set and didn't like that and gifted that to someone else. I can't even remember what it was now, but it was very Rider-Waite-y, I think. I don't think it was the Rider-Waite one, but I think it was like that, and I didn't gel with it. I then got the Druid Wicca tarot set and gelled with that, and that was the only one I used for many, many years. And at that point I was identifying with a lot of things. A lot of the books that were available right then were Wicca, and that was the thing that I started off in a spiritual sense, because basically that's the only information at that point that was really available, and it is still the mass of what is available to this day. And Wicca will always have a special place in my heart, because a lot of the books that basically opened me up to the rest of my path were Wicca. And despite all of the negative naysaying that gets said about modern Wicca and things, I have nothing but appreciation for it. And some parts of it are still in my practice, such as celebrating the Sabbats and Esbats. The Sabbats, of course, have a grounding, at least 4 of them, the 4 fire festivals, in Celtic roots, and then the other 4 go back beyond Wicca anyway. So when you actually start looking into the origins of these festivals, I don't think it should be as limiting as you can only practice these and celebrate these if you follow Wicca, otherwise they have no meaning, because I think that's really disrespectful in a lot of ways, and you're sort of missing out. So just because Wicca introduced you to something and you're no longer following Wicca doesn't mean that these things cannot have significance. And I honestly feel that following the cycles of the year and the cycles of the moon in terms of Esbats and things is a really important thing for a witch to engage in personally. being a witch is having this, for me anyway, obviously. Again, it's only me talking about me. Talking about me. Me. Me, more me. Hello, Mr. Anderson. Okay, anyway, stop. Right. Because basically I have no right to talk about anybody else's practice, so yeah, there we go. I've completely lost my trail of thought by being daft. So for me, being a witch is having a big grounding and rooting in nature. I never believed in, like, you had to be in a building to be in a sacred place. I very much believe that the sacred places of the world were out there, were in nature. The true majesty of the ocean always blows me away, because I have nearly always, despite living on an island, lived about as far away from the sea as I can. Not through my own choice. Apart from when I was in Canterbury, which I could get to the ocean. But other than that, I've lived very inland, very in the centre. And the majesty of the sea, and especially being in Cornwall, which I would move to in a hot second if I could, was incredible. And I mean, we went to Cornwall when I was young, and we went in the that are associated with Merlin. Something else. I remember being blown away by all the crystals and things in the shop when we first went to Cornwall as well. That's something else which I've always loved. Crystals I've always been cray for, as you might have guessed. So in the second half, I guess, of my little path, I haven't even lived that long. I used to call myself an eclectic witch, because I didn't really know what other to call it than that. I didn't work with a specific god or goddess until the Morrigan, which may be worth mentioning. I worked with the god and goddess right from the beginning in the abstract, but I'd always prayed to Mother. So there is that, like right from being very, very young, I always prayed to Mother, which I guess goes against the general norm. And for many, many years I worked with God and Goddess in the abstract, and it wasn't until I felt the very burning need to know who my matron was many years later, which is what I would suggest to most people, is work in the abstract first and move on when you hear the call. So for many, many years I was working in the abstract, God and Goddess, male and female, and those energies were present, and I was working on spell work and divination work and learning through doing. That's when I had my first altar at university and things of that nature, and it was something that I always really loved as being part of a witch. The creation of a space to represent my relationship to deity, wheels of the year and things of that nature. I also had some of my very first real negative experiences at that point. I had an inverted commas friend who wasn't really a friend going between me and another group of girls whom I was trying to get to know, and she was telling these people that we were nasty to her, and she was coming back to us and telling us that they were nasty to her. It was pity party victim mode, so both groups would hate each other and like her, and yeah. And that all got tied into the witchy stuff because she supposedly followed it. She was very Christian, and then she was a Christo witch, and what she is now, I have no idea. That's not to say anything, any valid judgment on any other, it's just what she was. And I don't know, I mean, that's just, what she was, and that was unfortunately a negative experience. I guess moving on from that, when in my travels back home and back all over the place, witchcraft and things took a real backseat to real life drama for a while, and it's only since I've been here 4 years, that I've really been able to practice on a regular basis again. I've been able to have altars again. I've been able to connect to the Morrigan and now identify myself as a daughter of the Morrigan and a Celtic witch. I now have the freedom to do all of those things without judgment. In the years prior to that, let's call them dark ages, I mean, I had a boyfriend who was very Christian and I thought he was the love of my life, and he tried to stop me doing it altogether, and he had a lot of influence over me at that point. I'd gone through a lot of trauma, I was very, very low, and yeah, the exact words were, "You don't need that anymore, you've got through the tough stuff, you've got me now." Something to those words, to those effect. So that was a bit of a negative experience. And then more recent years I've pretty much documented on YouTube, not all of them, but a lot of things, and probably most of the things that I feel comfortable sharing, which isn't everything, of course, is on YouTube from the more recent times anyway. So I've always felt that I've been a witch, and there was definitely some natural ability going on there, definitely. And then there were sort of key indicators, you know, interest in cards, interest in nature, firm belief in spirits, always praying to Mother, the pendulum, knowing about pendulums and stuff. And then there was a great deal of research on my part, and then working it into a daily practice. Now, what I always say about being a witch, being involved in witchcraft, is that it's always a journey. And the day you think you know it all is the day you should stop. Because witchcraft is an expanding practice. It's not necessarily a spiritual practice. A lot of witches do have a spiritual practice as well. It's not necessarily, to me anyway, the same thing. Witchcraft is a craft, and then the spiritual side of it often complements in one way or another. And that is, of course, everybody's personal journey, and everybody does things differently, and everybody's going to have a unique experience because that's the path you're on, you know. You learn what you need to learn, you grow the way you need to grow, and you interact with nature, witchcraft, however you want to see it, the way that you do. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There is no correct way to walk the path. There is no one spiritual path that is correct as far as I'm concerned, and that's something that I truly believe in. That, you know, I think it was charming Pixie Flora who said there are many paths up the mountain, and I truly believe that. So I hope that was helpful. Any more questions, pop them down below and I'll try and get back to you ASAP. Many blessings.